Hi, and we're just letting everybody settle in now. So, first of all, it's welcome to everybody. This is now the 12th ILC home claims webinar. Quite surprising when you sit down and count them, and that's how long we've been in lockdown, though that is beginning to ease. So, thanks to everybody for the support. We've had tremendous figures, a lot of interest, and a lot of good correspondence afterwards, which is always great for our point of view. First of all, a big thanks, because this wouldn't happen without our corporate partners, so a big thanks to them. That's, just to mention them all, that's Carpenters, CoreLogic, GeoBear, iCab, Coreventa, the Innovation Group and Verisk. Thanks for your support. That really, really helps us all. We're going to continue looking at building claims and helping everybody get back to work, which is turned out to be a fairly slow and careful process. And I guess that's exactly what we would all expect. The idea of all of this is that we're helping each of us, we're helping us move forward, we're helping taking the industry forward in some challenging times, from everybody down. The insurers have a tremendously difficult job at the moment, all the way down to all the suppliers to deal with it. It's tough times, it's still a lot of unknown, but hopefully what we can do by working together, which I've seen so much of over the last 3 months, we can really move forward. Some of the feedback we've had from insurers and suppliers has been phenomenal in the ability to work together. This has brought a lot of people closer together, and hopefully what we can do is we can grab that as an initiative and move forward to ensure that the way we service claims gets better and better for all our customers. I know that's what everybody wants. So, quick bit of promo. We have a building claims which has been postponed a couple of times now, planned 29th of September. That will be really important, looking at the same issues as we were. Our motor conference couldn't take place because of the COVID outbreak. However, we have, if you look at our website, a terrific idea. It's a virtual motor festival taking place over, I think it's about 3 days. A really fantastic idea. There's a promo video which Chris and the team will tell you about that. And also, if you're also interested in motor, every Wednesday at 1:30, my friend Mark runs the ILC ARC 360 webinar. That's really interesting. I watched yesterday, it was terrific. So that's other things that we do, but let's get back to today. And today we're looking at the effect COVID-19's had on what would normally be vulnerable or special claims. So there's a bit of a widening taking place. We might try and size and define that to an extent. We'll see how we identify it, how we all deal with it, from insurers through to suppliers, because it's not always evident in the initial stages. So it will help us look at the special measures, the skills and the behaviours that are required. And then, of course, the impact that goes on from that. There are always consequences, and we'll look at what impact that might have on the process, on service, and in cost. Because after all, as we all know, this is not a high margin market for anybody, so we have to be efficient and be aware of what we're spending. So you're the claims people, your thoughts. I'm delighted to have on our panel today. Welcome back to Ian Marsh, who's the head of property claims at the in-house Saga Underwriters. Ian was with us a few weeks ago. James Fryer from Martindale, who you've also seen in some of our events before. Kate McKenzie of Courtesy Kitchens and Bathrooms, been on before there. Kate's joint owner there. Welcome to Alison Unwin, the head of domestic major loss at Sedgwick. Really pleased to have you here and know some of the terrific jobs that are going on there at the moment. And to Stephen Guy, who is just our sole Scotsman this week after so many of them 2 weeks ago. Stephen runs React UK as the MD and owner of that business up in Paisley. And they also take a look at some pretty special building claims as well in terms of vulnerable people. So really pleased to have everybody here today. As always, their views are their own. We're only here to help. There are no rights or wrongs in this. This is a new territory for us all. But hopefully, from working today, we can listen, we can consider, we can ask, and we can learn and move forward. At the bottom of the screen, you are usually able to get some questions and answers and chats. We'd be delighted about that. So I guess let's get going. I'll turn to Ian first and Saga. Ian, have you got a feel for how much wider the definition of vulnerable special is becoming in dealing with claims in the COVID-19 outbreak?
Yeah, obviously. I think obviously what we just need, and I've just done some groundwork really before we actually come on today, because obviously it's quite an involved subject when you actually start looking into it. And probably I started off with a couple of bullet points and ended up with probably about 4 pages of script. I think obviously one of the things that we need to look at first of all, with regards to the FCA, they provide their actual guidelines to insurers that we're asked to follow. And I did find quite a good definition, which I think is quite good and obviously explains a little bit more in detail. And I think the definition I've come up of, seen or found, it says it's someone who, due to their personal circumstance, is especially susceptible to detriment, particularly when a firm is not acting with appropriate levels of care. And I think that's actually quite a good definition. Yeah. I think with regards to vulnerable customers, obviously, you know, we do have very robust, like most insurers, very sort of robust processes in place. With regards to COVID-19 in particular, it has been a little bit difficult, and obviously I see that Stephen's on the phone from React. We've actually got a claim at the moment in Glasgow, which is particularly difficult, quite a large fire claim, but we've had to basically do what we can do to actually protect the property, talk to the customer just to make sure that they are safe and they're happy. On that particular one, they were quite adamant that they wanted to stay in the property as well. So we just need to understand that, you know, what does that look like and what does it mean for the customer? Really and truly, the FCA have only issued some recent guidelines, and they come out on the 14th of May. And that was really more surrounding customer financial relief, rather than obviously sort of any emerging vulnerability issues that we may have as a result of COVID-19. So yeah, I think for us it's still very much BAU. We're still following those guidelines, but perhaps we've actually had to make some alterations to the way that we actually relate to our customers, particularly, especially in Scotland and I think Wales, where, you know, there was virtually a total lockdown. It's exactly what we can do, and obviously make sure that customer's safe and secure.
Thanks, Ian. First of all, that's a great definition, and I think that helps us all. Alison, from your angle, I mean, you've got claims that last for quite a while, so I guess it falls into two categories: claims that we had started before COVID-19 interrupted, and claims that are waiting to be started. So, are you finding that there now is a wider number of claims where the vulnerable definition seems to be impacting?
Yeah, I think so. We've always worked to identify vulnerable customers when we receive a claim. The very fact in my area of responsibility, we're talking about domestic major loss. The very fact that somebody has suffered a major loss to their property could actually make anybody vulnerable. All of us could become vulnerable if your house suffered a severe fire or a severe flood. So for any period of time, any customer could actually be vulnerable. So we would look at every claim that we have in the normal course of business and try and identify which customers might need extra support and what that extra support might look like, because it will be different for every customer. I think what we've seen on the media during the lockdown is this expectation that mental health issues will become more widespread throughout the community. And I know that there was a study done by Mind that we've looked at previously where it suggests that 1 in 4 people in the UK, 1 in 4 adults in the UK will suffer a mental health issue during any given year. And during any given week, it could be 1 in 6 adults. And I think the media information and studies that have been done during the lockdown indicate probably those figures will go up. So customers who weren't vulnerable prior to the lockdown and whose claims were progressing normally may now be considered vulnerable. Maybe they're worried about their job, maybe they're suffering financial problems completely unrelated to the claim, maybe they're worried for the health of loved ones or somebody has become ill. So it's important that we are speaking to customers. It's all about communication at this stage, that you need to talk to people to find out not just what's going on with their claim. We can't make assumptions that we can just send the builders back in and Steve and his guys can just, you know, wade back into the property and carry on where they left off, because things might have changed for the customer. So for us, it's about speaking to the customers, communication, find out what's going on and what's right for them.
Okay. Thanks, Alison. That clearly is a big issue in terms of the mental effects and the well-being effects it has, and something we did look at a few weeks ago. Stephen, the other part of the vulnerability that I think I often wonder about is, and it's a kind of double-edged sword, one is somebody's going to invite builders into their house, theoretically. So you have to set in a team of people going into the house, perhaps to work for 3 or 4 days. But these people might be very, very strict, and hopefully they are, in their view of keeping the place clean, keeping it germ-free, making sure that they take all the precautions. So that makes it a bit more vulnerable. And equally, you can have people going in there taking all the correct steps that you advise them to take. They might be worried to get into home. So we have sort of other things that are impacting upon the vulnerability here. There's the straight vulnerability of people who should be shielding or perhaps whose immune systems aren't strong. But we've just got the straight vulnerability of people very concerned that your guys, no matter how good they are, could end up infecting their house. How are you dealing with that?
The way we've taken measures over the last 10 weeks to be constantly speaking with all our customers on a weekly basis, probably too much. Some of them are just even wanting to speak to you, how is my claim progressing in this lockdown? So what we've been, some are very sensible, they're saying we don't want to see you until August, July. Insurers are, I think from what I've seen here is for the first time the industry has been united. Insurers are understanding, adjusters are understanding, contractors, we're all pulling together. So it's given us the confidence to speak to our customers and say, this is what we're doing. And we're listening to our customers. We're saying to them, we guys that can come in and do you is in first and foremost. Have you had any symptoms? Have you been poorly? If all those kind of sort of due diligence is right, we can proceed. We are then making sure areas are taped off. The customers, they're not even allowed to be in the same room as us. We will stand outside when we're giving them updates. When the trades are finished, they're disinfecting the whole areas that they've worked in. So there is challenges. I was speaking to a customer the other day and she was saying, look, you're going to be here for 2 weeks. What are you going to do about toilet facilities? So that's something now we need to look at. If the guys, it's not even as if our trades can jump down to the supermarket and do that. They need to queue for 2 hours and I only give them 10 minutes for their lunch. So it's not as if we can even do that. So I think it's all about listening to what the customers are wanting, how they're feeling, and making sure we're looking at different systems at the moment. The fogging machines, we're thinking that's maybe a step in the right direction. Look, do you know what? After maybe not every job, but certainly if there's a fair amount of work's been done in a property, right, let's fog it once we're out, and that's going to give the customer that little bit more peace of mind and so on and so forth. So our guys, we've had all our guys in over the last 6 weeks, talking to them, explaining what we're going to be doing going forward. We've been speaking to some of our customers that we deem to be vulnerable, and we've been just taking that extra time on the phone with them even. They've told us the same thing time and time again, but just taking that time to reassure them, because there's a lot of unknowns out there, including for us as contractors as well, but we're just listening, and as long as we take the right precautions and make sure everybody's safe, we will come out of it.
Because one of the things that raised, and we'll look at this perhaps in more detail next week, is all this care, which is absolutely vital, it has a price ticket attached to it, which we've done one way or another. And we will, next week we'll be looking at schedules of rates just now and flexibility, and perhaps looking at how we can be more uniform with it in the future. But we might come back to the cost and service implications of this later on with Ian. Just over to you, James. You, through all of this, Martindale's, with the breadth of the product, have had to deal with a lot of emergency staff and get out and sort it quickly. So there's a variance of type of claims in there. How have you found how policyholders have received all of this, the state of nervousness or comfort?
Well, first of all, it's encouraging to know, I think everyone on the call here is singing from the same hymn sheet, and I'm only going to repeat some of the things that the other guys have said, but at the end of the day, we're all in the business of delivering a service to customers in the time of need, and it's just that this is a bit of a different time of need. So it's been one thing to try and categorise and understand what category people fall into from a COVID-19 point of view, key workers, isolating, shielding, etc. But the key really has been the communication and understanding what that individual person's needs are. So we've been ringing them, as have many people, the day before any visit, just to ensure that they're comfortable with us coming and reassure them about the use of PPE, distancing, etc. But from our point of view, in the glazing windows and doors business, many customers are vulnerable simply by virtue of the fact that they've got an insecure home. So what's been important for us is to maintain as close to a BAU service as possible. And, you know, hopefully, thanks to the measures we've put in place and having dedicated people, we've been able to do that.
Thanks, James. Kate, you're a sort of specialist company, and within your own market, you're quite specialist at trying to look after and make, you know, specific solutions for people. Do we find out vulnerability often once you've been appointed? In other words, do you always know that people are vulnerable before you get there? Sometimes you get there and think, oh gosh, we better make some changes here because we've discovered that you know, people are a bit nervous or haven't wanted to say things before that might upset people.
Yeah, I think in general, obviously our partners do try and identify as much as possible, but more often than not, I think more so with where we are in today's climate and what's going on, it's very interchangeable. I know, for example, in myself, I can feel absolutely fine, confident, happy one day, and the next day I'm filled with a little bit of dread and worry and anticipation of what's actually happening. So that's going to apply to everyone across the board. So we do as much as possible over the telephone whilst we're booking and confirming. Obviously discuss the steps that we're taking, safety measures, and try to assure them that at any point during this process, if they do want to change their mind, if they do have a question, if they want us to stop, so that even if they can have a bit of breathing space to really assess what's going on, that's absolutely fine. So as a business, we've kind of had to slow down slightly. I mean, like you say, we've always tried to be quite adaptable to those more specialist cases, or those that are maybe more vulnerable or not quite straightforward. But I think you just need to take a little bit of extra care at the moment, and kind of echoing what Alison was saying, and also Stephen as well, with the mental health and the listening. Mental health isn't necessarily something that stands out and is quite easily identifiable just by ticking a box. And because it does change from day to day, it needs to be something that's constantly you need to be constantly aware of. And I think prior to COVID-19, I don't think mental health was really taken as seen highlighted as a vulnerability, when actually that can really affect somebody's day-to-day business. So yeah, we just try to assure everyone really, and take things slow. At every change or step of the process, we will contact the customer again. While the guys are installing at the moment, obviously we want everyone to keep their distance, so they'll even phone them if they need to move from the front of the house to the back of the house, for example, just so they know exactly where they are and they can just be feeling a little bit more comfortable with everything that's going on. If they told us to stop for whatever reason, then we need to.
Yes, it is, and I agree. And I think we have explored well-being before, certainly amongst, not just amongst the policyholders, but amongst claims people. And I think we'll probably do that again in a few weeks. Ian, back to you. How easy is it to identify new vulnerabilities in the early part of the claims process? So when a notification comes in,
yep.
You know, I've heard from people like Kate and James and people before that they've discovered there was more vulnerability when they get out there, because contrary to what a lot of us deal with, many people don't want to point out on the phone it's a problem. No, it's not too difficult. So how easy is it for you to sort of out the information as early as possible?
Okay, I think obviously we have, as I said beforehand, we have obviously some good robust processes in place. We also have a matrix that's actually built into our claim system. Obviously, the thing that we have to do is we have to look at potential vulnerability and actual vulnerability. And we do actually need to actually define both of those. And one of the things I was speaking to the ops manager this morning, Laura, and one of the things that she came up with is that it's sometimes really difficult for us to identify that a customer is vulnerable over that first call. You do find out that a lot of people just don't want to talk about it. So if they've got a financial issue, if they've got some mental health issues, if they've actually got some other issues, it's actually quite difficult. So I think from our scenario is that we use the matrix to identify. We do put our handlers through quite a lot of training so that they can actually act upon that information. So I think what I would say to you is more a bit like a case-by-case basis. So we just need to understand what that vulnerability is. So we do really need to talk to that customer and understand that. And obviously the other thing that we have to do, obviously, which is part of the FCA guidance, is that we may actually identify that they're vulnerable, but we do actually have to ask permission of the customer to send that information over to our supply chain. So from our perspective, is it easy? No, it's not. It is not black and white, and it's certainly not an actual tick box. It's just utilising and speaking to that customer. Obviously, when we use technology, as you know, that we actually use a product which is actual video product, it's a lot easier to identify that. It's a lot more difficult when you're actually using the telephone. And I think obviously once we identify and we get that permission from the customer to send that information to our supply chain, we will do that. So when they get the initial instruction, they will know that this is either a potential or an actual vulnerable customer. And I think obviously listening to all the guys, communication is absolutely vital, because during a claim journey, they may start off as perfectly okay, but all of a sudden they become vulnerable. They may lose a partner, they may get into financial difficulties. Mental health is really huge at the moment, so understanding that. So our supply chain and working together is absolutely vital, just to make sure there's that two-way information. So, if Steve's out there with React, let us know there's a vulnerable customer. We've got ways of flagging it, and then we just work together just to make sure. And some of it is really simple. It's just communication, incredibly simple. It's just that the customer wants to be kept in the loop a little bit more. We might have to look at AA, which is obviously going to be, there may be some alternative AA options that we need to have a look at. But I think as an insurer, we insure people of a certain demographic that may be vulnerable. So obviously we do need to take that into consideration.
Thanks. I think one of the things, I'll move on to Alison with this one, but you might want to come back to it later. Somebody's asked in the question section, how do you set the difference between mental health and anxiety about particular situations? And without training, I guess we can. But Alison, when your guys get out there and it hasn't been flagged because they've been unable to establish there may be a situation, given that also what Ian's saying is to communicate such things, you have to have the permission of people. If you're caught in the middle, which often you are, between the insurer and the supplier who's going to repair or put in a kitchen or bathroom or replace a bit of glass, how do you manage that communication? One, identify it, and two, manage it.
Well, Ian, if I can just go back to something Ian said, because he's picked up an important point there about people disclosing vulnerabilities. And the other point of that is that not all customers who are vulnerable recognise that they're vulnerable, and therefore, and we certainly don't tell any customers that we consider them to be vulnerable. It's not something that we tell them. We don't say to customers, you are a vulnerable customer. And there are people we might identify to have vulnerabilities, or they're displaying vulnerable traits which might indicate they're vulnerable, but they won't consider themselves to be vulnerable. So that does present a bit of a challenge. And as Ian said, if somebody does disclose something to us about a vulnerability, perhaps, they tell us that maybe they've got that they're caring for somebody in the house who is very vulnerable. We do need to ask their permission before we record that on the file and before we forward that to any of our suppliers. Normally, if they've disclosed it to us, they're usually quite happy for us to then flag it to a supplier, because it is something that, for example, the contractor will need to know before they turn up on site, if they've got to make special arrangements for access or shielding or something else. But there is a point that not all customers recognise their own vulnerabilities. Now, we might get to site, and then maybe in the conversation with the customer, you might start to think that perhaps they are living with a condition such as dementia. They may or may not have had a diagnosis of that, but there might be, when you're a constant repetition of questions or not quite understanding what you've told them, there might be flags that come up. We have to be very careful how we pass that information on, but it is important that we've had a conversation with Steve or James or one of the contractors to say, when you go and see Mrs. Smith, you might need to keep repeating the information to her. Please make sure she understands. Please make sure you've rung her, when you're outside the property, that you've got your ID ready, because we think that might be what she needs. But we wouldn't flag that as a, this customer is vulnerable, because she doesn't recognise herself that she's vulnerable. So it's a challenge, but it's all about, these things come with experience and training and seeing lots and lots of different customers. And I'm sure everybody on this call has had interaction with many, many customers over the years. And you just become aware that some people require perhaps just a slightly different method of communication. They may need everything followed up in writing. Even small snippets of information that every time you speak to them on the phone, you just follow up in writing to make sure and then check in that they've understood what you've said. Might be as simple as that. For other people, the vulnerabilities, of course, might be more complex, and you turn up on site, not having come across in any way on the telephone, but you turn up and realise that there's a situation that we need to deal with. And it's just about communicating that to the right people, but in the right way without disclosing something that shouldn't be disclosed.
Yeah, great. And the dementia one's a big one. I'm actually an advocate of ensuring dementia. I work with the Alzheimer's Society. And of course, part of the problem here is, and I guess this would probably come when you go on site, Stephen, yes, people don't know they've got dementia, won't admit it, won't admit their partners have it. But if they really have it and you go on site, does that present a danger in the current circumstances to the proximity and things they might do with relation to what you should be under COVID-19 and how they're working with you guys on site?
Yeah, again, I think every case is slightly different, and I think when we can speak to them, as Alison said, we can do the triage calls and we can have chats with customers, and across the phone it comes across everything's okay at that property. Our guys are experienced enough when they go on site, look, this customer's a bit confused or this customer's not really sure what's going on, and they'll phone into the office and we'll say, well, we've told them exactly what is happening. So these are telltale signs to us, that, right, okay, so we just need to be that wee bit more cautious. We just need to make sure, we tell the trades, look, we might have told them and from over the phone, but when you're there, explain it to them again what's required. With regards to the COVID, it's please don't come into our working area, let's keep the distances, and we explain to them the whole process and what we're going to be doing, i.e. sanitising everything and cleaning it up and stuff like that. So they are aware, but it's certainly something that if the guys do feel, even our trades feel a little bit uncomfortable, then they'll highlight it to us, of which we will then report back to insurers for guidance. And and this is the beauty of our industry, that everybody supports, everybody involved in this. And that's certainly, as you've mentioned, Alan, over the last 10 weeks, everybody's came together on it so that we are a way to make sure our customers are looked after. So yeah, every case is slightly different.
James, how do you find the communication of increased vulnerability? We have the existing vulnerability, and I think some of you have said, and certainly Alison and Kate have suggested, the process of going through COVID-19 might help us with the more traditional vulnerable customers. But how have you found the communication now in knowing that a customer you're going to go to is nervous over the COVID situation, maybe worried about it?
Well, first of all, there's a the support we get from the insurers in the first place by sending the instructions and flagging any vulnerabilities. That's step one of us becoming aware. Step two is the first call to the customer. Step three is our surveyor being on site, which is our eyes and ears. And at that point, if something is recognised, there's always, we can go back to the insurer to discuss any additional vulnerabilities that we might come across or any nervousness they might have. And there's always alternatives to doing it. So can we use our desktop validation service and do it remotely? But I think Ian mentioned one thing that doesn't get mentioned much, which is financial vulnerability. So what's been quite refreshing with dealing with our insurer clients is a number of them are quite switched on to the fact that there might be customers vulnerable because they're in financial difficulty due to COVID, either through being on furlough or losing the jobs, not working, etc. So what's been good is the ability for us to report that back. Obviously without the customer knowing and keeping it low key in case, there's some support and help that they can be given.
Yeah, I mean, communication is vital, and it's going to be two-way. Kate, in some of the stuff you do, then when you get to places, you sometimes have to adapt to things like steeper driveways, narrower driveways. And also, are you finding a slight increase in demand because, first of all, there's not as much alternative accommodation available in hotels as there are in other places, and people kind of feel as if they might be more isolated if they have a kitchen or bathroom kind of made to measure put in their place?
Yeah, we initially, when this all first started, we had a spike as such, and then it went very, very quiet and eerily quiet for a couple of weeks, and now we are seeing more than usual wanting to use our kitchens and bathrooms. And I do think there's a variant amount of reasons there, probably because there is less alternative accommodation out there that's obviously slowly opening up. But I think people, it's the vulnerability, isn't it? It's I want to stay at home. That's mine. It's safe. I know where I am with this, and it's more yours to look after and know that you've got this protective bubble, really. And a lot of people are doing that. I mean, even outside of the insurance sector, we're getting a lot more queries and requests for it due to that very reason. People don't want to go to second homes. They don't want to stay in hotels or caravans, or they can't stay at family members, for example. So for that side of it, it's definitely we're more needed at the moment for that very reason. But I think. I think people have probably just realised how important the home is, really, and I think that's fed through to insurers as well. I think they see the importance of keeping people at home.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. Actually, we spent a lot of time here, and probably that has changed people's views. Back to you, Ian, a couple of things. First of all, on the point that was made earlier, if you can flag it, you have to be careful flagging it with permission. So how might you want suppliers to flag stuff they find back to you? Because they often see it when they get there, as you rightly pointed out earlier. And secondly, in terms of what a couple of them said, particularly, some of the stuff that Stephen was saying as a contractor, how easy is it going to be to cope with the increased cost of some of the procedures that have to be put in place, given that we all have to recognise, this is a cost-driven product, home insurance, and as a result of that, the margins will be tight, and there just isn't a stack of money to throw at these things. So that's a kind of double-barreled question.
Okay. Obviously, with regards to our supply chains, as I said beforehand, they are just so vitally important. They're the eyes and the ears. They're on the ground, and they actually understand that we may actually be thinking following a telephone call that everything is okay. And obviously when they actually go on site, that's when they actually discover that there is some sort of vulnerability. And again, obviously, just to really just confirm is that, when you've got a major loss, obviously Alison, I think, has alluded to it, a big fire that may take 12 months to complete, things will change. The actual customer will change. You might have had, we've had it quite often where you've actually got two elderly people. One has issues and concerns, but the other is quite compass mentis, knows what they're saying, and they know what they want to do. But obviously, if that decision maker then suddenly goes out of the frame, it really does become difficult. So it is, we ask that where the supply chain identified that there is a vulnerability, we talk about it. We would have already shared our vulnerable policy with our supply chain, so they understand our thoughts and processes. And you'd normally find out with most insurers that probably about 80 or 90% are aligned, because obviously we are actually following FCA guidelines. With regards to cost, it is a difficult one. We will always consider any cost that's put forward to us. I think, as Kate alluded to, we start off with can you go and stay with some, family and friends, to going into serviced accommodation, to getting some sort of kitchen pod or something on site for the customer, and to, the very rare circumstance where we have to actually look at care home costs. With regards to COVID-19, we've only really seen a handful of cases where there has been an impact, and that's mainly surrounding AA costs. So where obviously we put somebody into a six-month short-term rent, we've had to extend that for a further 3 months. Obviously, while the contractor comes out of furlough and obviously gets his staff back on site. I think also at the particular time in COVID-19, the industry have actually seen quite a downturn on claims coming through. And I think also the type of claim that's coming through has actually changed as well, because obviously we've now got actually customers at their properties. So if they have a small water leak, rather than being sort of enjoying one of our Saga cruises or being in Tenerife, they're actually within the home and they can actually stop that leak. So I think actually it's a two-sided coin here, is that actually, yes, we anticipate that we are going to have some additional costs. There may be some additional costs from PPE and other things that we have to do. But, you know, conversely, looking at the other side of the coin, there has actually been a drop in the number of claims coming through and also the severity of those claims as well.
Right, very important balance, to be fair. And of course, we've seen action, some of that from motor insurers as well. I'm trying to rebalance that, but very interesting. Alison, over to you then. How do you balance this issue where with a wider definition of vulnerable in COVID-19 to balance controlling the costs when you're trying to resolve, you know, very wide domestic major losses? Again, sparing in between those that already started and might have slowed down or stopped to against those that are about to start. So how are you able to straddle the costs with this?
One of the things we did quite early on in the lockdown was look at all the ongoing claims we had from the floods, because it seems a lifetime ago now, but we had a load of in February and also some back in November that are still ongoing. So we looked at those quite early on and prioritised the ones that we would want contractors to get back to first, if they were able to. So that was on a range of factors, but one of those factors was the alternative accommodation, where if we've got people who were flooded in February and were in 6-month lets, then a lot of that will be coming to an end in August, and thus, you know, if contractors are only back in June and July, we've tried to prioritise them to see whether we can still get those properties completed by August so that we're not having to extend the accommodation. And then we've also, again, looked at people's vulnerabilities, people who are perhaps suffering during the lockdown mentally, we've spoken about before, and desperately want to get back home. So there are other people for whom works hadn't started and who are still living in their properties, and who, for the time being, prefer to remain in their properties and actually want the works delayed until perhaps, you know, the end of the lockdown and so on. So we've got a list of people that we wanted work started more quickly, spoke to the contractors. Not all possible. There's been shortages of materials in some places, as I'm sure Steve is well aware. So it's not possible to say, yeah, we want this claim done first, because there might be reasons why they can't. But in general, we know the claims that we wanted progressed quickly, and that has happened, and the contractors are back on site and those ones are moving forward. So there's not necessarily an increase in AA where we've been able to prevent that, but we haven't been able to prevent it on every claim. New claims that have come forward during the lockdown, as Ian said, there's been a downturn in the attritional escape of water type claims. So the claims that come forward into my area of the business have tended to be the big fire claims, and unfortunately there have been quite a number of big fire claims during the lockdown. And then finding accommodation for people, it's not possible to have, the extent of the damage generally means they can't have a kitchen pod and bathroom pod and remain living there. And finding alternative accommodation when serviced apartments and hotels for a time were just a complete no-no has been difficult, just to find some places for people to rent and go and move to. So undoubtedly some of the costs that we've had to incur for insurers on a short-term basis on those were perhaps higher than they would otherwise have been, where we'd have been able to get people into a rental property more quickly. But things have opened up now, the estate agents are back open, the rental properties are back on the market. So it's less of a problem. It was a short-term problem, but it will have affected a handful of customers, I guess.
Yeah. And of course, with the vulnerabilities that come with being out of your house for a long time as well, that can be a quick question for the three suppliers. We'll start with you, Stephen. How do you juggle the priorities between a very vulnerable customer, a more practical and financially viable way to go about prioritising your work and keeping all your customers happy?
I think first and foremost, we identified it early on because our clients were asking us, look, we need a list of who's in a situation of alternate accommodation and they're desperate to get back home, what properties could get progressed even sort of over the last 6 weeks. And then we've got the profitability of moving things on for the business side. Now, we've just looked at case by case. We've looked at customers that are maybe are poorly and they need back in. So we've potentially looked at that. We've looked at the cost for the AA because we've got an obligation for our clients to make sure that they're not putting hotels for 6 months. And I think we've just kind of looked at it along those bases. I think we've taken each case. We had an elderly customer who we deemed very vulnerable. She had no cooking. I mean, I think Boris Johnson announced on the Monday night that we're in lockdown, and she had half a kitchen in. She had been in alternate accommodation, and she was just desperate to get put back out. And our lads did rally around and got her done on the Tuesday so that she could get back in her house. And so it's things like that. We've had to take a kind of a look at, right, is that customer desperate, if you like? We've talked briefly on mental health issues. Is this going to have an impact on them? So we need to move quickly. So yeah, it's case by case basis, and again, we've not had too much resistance, to be honest, from customers. They're very understanding. If it's just a bedroom to be painted, they're not pushing us to get in. So it's more to do with someone that is in a lot worse off position. So that's where we're prioritising it.
Hey, James, that question is there a balance? Thanks, Stephen. Is there a balance between the jobs that are financially better for suppliers and what, let's face it, is a pretty tough time in terms of managing their cash and making sure they're ready to go back, and vulnerable customers, and perhaps varying priorities with some of your clients?
Yeah, I mean, one of the things we haven't been able to control is understandably, is the volume of instructions that we've been getting. So we've, and it has, there has been a massive drop, circa, at the worst point, probably circa 60% down on normal. But we've been trying to focus on the things we can control. So, yes, we've been prioritising as we understand people's situations, in the same way you would through someone having an insecure property and someone having a secure property. You'd prioritise the one that's insecure. But aside from all that, the challenges that people have had through COVID, certainly with people with a window or glazing or door claim, is the main challenge has been the availability of products. So, it helps that we have our own in-house manufacturing, and we manufacture, the vast majority of products that we use on insurance claims, because that's helped us shield customers from that disruption in the supply chain. So yes, cash flow is important, and in that score, the insurers that we work with have really stepped up to the plate with this. Yes, they've been paying us on time. There's been no attempt to change payment terms. People have been paying on time or early, and that kind of mirrors what we have been doing with our supply chain. So you can demonstrate a partnership approach and ensure we can still get the products we need.
Yeah, I mean, that is interesting. It's been a great outcome. Courtesy kitchens and bathrooms kind of do specialist stuff. So you deal with claims that are awkward, you deal with situations that are awkward, you make new pods up because there's somebody in your business that likes to just make things up for people that suit them precisely. So you're very exact in what you do. Has that had to change, or is that even more important now that you specifically deal with your own speciality of looking after awkward?
In the grand scheme of things, sorry, I didn't quite catch that last bit.
I didn't say awkward customers, I said awkward positions. Situations with people.
So in the grand scheme of things, I don't feel that much has changed. We have always positioned ourselves at people who pay attention to detail. And we'll go out of our ways to accommodate people. I mean, for me personally, customer service has always been the forefront of our business. So I feel that that's something that skill and quality is something that's really benefited us and our clients and people who are using our services at this time. I think people need that extra sort of cuddle and comfort, really, for want of a better way of describing it. So yeah, I think there has been some things obviously that we've learned in probably the pace and extra ways that we can adapt more with communication throughout the process. So I'm looking forward to sort of really continuing. I can't really see us changing from where we are now to, say, COVID-19's disappeared and we're all free to do what we want. I think it's going to be, this is business as usual now. I can't see us really deterring from where we are. But yeah, so I'm kind of, but not really wanting to say it's been exciting, but it has been exciting in the sense of it's been a learning curve. And I think for the industry as a whole, I think we've probably all learned a lot of just small little things that can really, really make a big difference along the way.
Thanks, Kate. Last word to Ian. Ian, you know, is every case at the current moment, do we have to start every case thinking there might be a vulnerability there? And again, a bit like Kate says, what do you think are the big lessons that we've picked up in dealing with vulnerable cases, in the broadening of the definition of it because of COVID-19?
Okay. I think obviously with regards to what we've learned, I think, you know, as I said beforehand, we've actually got robust processes in place. And I think obviously it is essential going through COVID that we just keep that communication open with the customer. And we actually obviously keep that communication open with our supply chain as well. The only thing obviously with regards to vulnerability it's shown us through COVID-19 is how we have to potentially deal with the claim in a totally different way, where basically we can't actually get our supply chain on site. So, you know, what do we have to consider? What do we have to discuss with the customer? Meet that customer's expectations as well. And I think that's just quite, that's really important. And I think, obviously, if I may, just add a little bit on there as well, Alan, is that, you know, what we're doing with our supply chain is we really are encouraging the suppliers, that there's lots of industry workshops out there at the moment. And they actually to get an understanding of the actual challenges that's actually set by the new guidance. You know, they come up with over sort of like 30 different examples of how a person could be vulnerable. And that goes through a whole, you know, wealth of different type scenarios. And I think just the final thing I'd like to say is that, you know, for our supply chain, if you've got any doubt, speak to the insurer and agree a joint resolution. That's what needs to be done.
Thanks, Ian. I think that's very important. I just also want to add before we finish that next week from this, as I said earlier, next week we'll be looking at how schedules of rates and traditional things are going to be able to cope with COVID-19 as we return to work. And then I think we're going to take that and see if we can pick up anything that will allow us to extend that beyond the current climate and see if we can pick up and learn to continue to improve I guess the process and the communication, which we've talked so much about today and in previous webinars, have really helped throughout the whole supply chain. Thank you again to Stephen, Kate, Ian, James and Alison. If you have any questions for any of them, or you want to know more about them or their businesses, please just drop me a note at alan@iloveclaims.com and I will put you in contact with them. As I said, Building Conference, 29th of September. Next week, we'll be looking, as just pointed out, a schedule of rates for repairs all the way through from disaster recovery through. We've got to take a close look at how we're going to cope with that. There's some very interesting people talking about that. If you want to register for the ILC news or the ILC home email pack, just again, contact me at alan@iloveclaims.com. Also look on the website again for ARC 360 every Wednesday 1:30 with Mark if you're interested in motor repairs. It's very, very interesting, and our virtual motor festival coming up. All we do in all of this is hopefully to help everybody be better tomorrow from what they learned today. At the ILC function, you're only learning from one another, and we hope that will continue as far forward as we can see it, both in webinars and in events when we eventually get them back. Thanks for the input from everybody today. It was really terrific. As I say every week, please obey the rules, be safe for yourselves, your businesses and your families. Thank you very much.
Yeah.
Thank you.